Welcome to the Shadow Warrior podcast. I'm the host, Rajeev Srinivasan, a professor of strategy and innovation and a columnist in India. Episode 93 is titled, Should India Help Pakistan Out Now that things are looking pretty bleak for it? I guess a case could be made, and one could argue either way about the merits of such an act. It is obvious that Pakistan is not doing too well financially. Just one example of that is that the Pakistani rupee has now collapsed to something like 250 or 260 to the US dollar, in contrast with the Indian rupee, which is holding steady at roughly 80 to 82. This obviously means that the value of the Pakistani economy or its worth has diminished. Then there is the set of rumors that Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves are sufficient for only about 10 days worth of imports. So there is clear economic trouble there. On the other hand, they have faced problems with natural disasters. If you remember, there was a big flood in December, if I'm not mistaken, that seems to have done a fair amount of damage. Then, of course, on the political and military side, they are at a point where their problems with not only internal, I don't know, dissidents or perhaps opponents of the regime and those from their neighbor Afghanistan are kind of creating havoc within the country. There have been some unprecedented clashes between the Taliban and the Pakistani army, for example. Apart from which, their vaunted all-weather friend, the one with the, I guess, the tall as the mountains, China, is probably not all that happy with them, considering that their CPEC investments haven't really panned out. So, apart from the headline-making poverty, I saw some video of people fighting for bags of atta, flour, in Pakistan. So things seem to be in pretty bad shape. That's on the one hand. On the other, you have these Pakistani leaders suddenly offering peace talks, and they want to put the Kashmir issue on the back burner and move forward with peace talks with India on all other issues. Now this is good, but the question is how much of this is meant for the consumption of the Americans and others who are constantly attempting to quote unquote bring peace between India and Pakistan, and how much of it is real and a rethink of their fundamental issue or their fundamental raison d'etre, not only for Pakistan but also for the Pakistani army in particular. The only reason for its existence is to be A, not India, and B, the enemy of India. And since there is the well-known trope that Allah, America, and the army are the entities that control Pakistan. The army obviously doesn't want to give up any of its central role in running the country. So if there were to be peace with India, whatever will the army do? So there are some issues there. So there's room to believe that any talk of peace is merely a ruse to get over the current difficulties. Maybe they believe that the Americans will bail them out yet again, or maybe they believe that the Indians can be fooled yet again. And this brings me back to previous instances of India being the fall guy easily to Pakistan. I'm going to focus on Musharraf because he embodied, in particular, the commando nature of that nation's army, which is they're tactically quite brilliant, but then strategically that doesn't seem to work. As we may have observed, when Musharraf died, there was a lot of talk about him. Much of it was laudatory, but in fact, I thought it was interesting that Musharraf was the person who constantly attempted commando tactics, and although they might have been short-term wins in the long run or even in the medium run, they were not so useful to the country. For example, he attacked us in Kargil, which was clever. He was able to occupy the heights, but then it ended up in an ignominious retreat for him. And then later, he arranged for the attack on the Indian Parliament, and that didn't go too well because India started massing its troops in Operation Parakram and was giving every intention of invading the country. Now, of course, their short-term tactical genius came into the picture in creating the Gujarat problem. I believe strongly that Pakistan had a role, not only a role, but a major role in planning and executing the burning of the Sabarmati Express on 27th February 2002, which in the end led to India being forced to drop Operation Parakram and stop the mobilization because the army was needed for other purposes in the country. So that was a tactical success, but in the long run, there's a strategic failure there, which is that suddenly Narendra Modi's star started rising because if you remember, Narendra Modi was actually a nobody in 2001. He had been put into the position of CM of Gujarat after the Bhuj earthquake, and the current CM, whose name I don't remember, had not done a great job. He was just, sort of put in there as a caretaker. But 20 plus years later, it looks like Narendra Modi has actually pulled India up a level, and it's looking rather good. So again, there was a strategic failure there on the part of Pakistan. So given this history, I don't see any reason why they would not continue to do the same things that they did before. Although, if you remember, there was this dictum that doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different outcome is the very definition of insanity. Well, that seems to be par for the course with the Pakistanis. Now, I've been seeing all kinds of write-ups about how India must help Pakistan. There was one in particular from Hassan Surur, who wrote in the Times of India a heartrending plea, actually, which said that these are our brothers, these are family, we must help them. Well, I like the sentiment, and I would like to all of us have a chance to sit down and sing Kumbaya, but when Pakistan on a daily basis is doing things that are unpleasant to us, unpleasant to Hindus, for example, they are decimating the Hindu population in their country. It's a little bit much to believe that they are our estranged family. And I have personal experience with Pakistanis that I went to work with in Bell Labs and in Silicon Valley and so forth. And beyond a certain superficial camaraderie, I never, felt a great deal of compassion for them or fellow feeling for them. But that could just be me. But the final thought I had, well, in addition to Hassan Surur, there was also Hussein Haqqani, who made an impassioned plea for India to help Pakistan. But I think this whole thing. I'm sorry to appear a little bit heartless, but I think the famous Napoleonic dictum, which was, quote, "Do not interrupt the enemy when he is making a mistake," is the flavor du jour in regards to the India-Pakistan situation. They have made a bunch of mistakes and they're suffering for it. So why should we intervene and help them out? Why should we make their life any better? Let them, stew in their own problems. And there is one more meme that's very popular in India, which says, with no evidence whatsoever, that a strong and peaceful Pakistan is in India's best interest. I think that's complete nonsense. It's just one of those pabulum-like statements that are thrown around by the Indian left with no evidence and no logic either. In fact, a broken, poor, and starving Pakistan is much better as far as India is concerned, because then they would probably not go in for their military misadventures against India. So we've reached a point where Pakistan is pretty much in that situation. So I think, despite any considerations of humanity and humanitarian aid and so forth, this is probably the wrong time for India to be helping them out. So let me suggest that in the great or the wise words of Zulfikar Bhutto, who had said he would eat grass but build a nuclear, I guess, capability. Well, let them eat grass, or in the famous words of the the French Queen, let them eat cake. I don't think India should do anything for them whatsoever. It should do whatever is possible to balkanize Pakistan into 4 or 5 states, Balochistan and Pashtunistan and Sindh and AJK or the so-called AJK. These can all separate from Punjab, and if you have 5 statelets there, that would be the best outcome for India. So I don't think it's on the cards that India should help them today, and or for that matter, ever. So I think that's my perspective on this particular issue.